Welcome to Erupt. I'm Yasmine Tanres.
And I'm LaBruna. Today we are hosting a debate on abortion rights. Arguments were heard at the Supreme Court this week in regards to a Mississippi law that bans abortion after 15 weeks. But let's take a step back into the original case set in 1973 that set the precedents in Roe v. Wade that women had a fundamental right to abortion.
Joining us here today, we have a couple of guests, Kaylee Campbell and Elli Fitzgerald. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for having us.
All right, this is obviously a very hot topic, which is going to change the life of many women. So nearly 1 in 4 women in the United States will have an abortion by the age of 45. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of everything, we just want to know from both of you, what's your stance on the matter and why?
So I am personally pro-life. I've always been pro-life. And why? Because I believe that every child deserves to live, no matter how they're conceived. And it's completely wrong to murder a baby.
I am pro-choice. I think we can agree on it being wrong to murder a baby. I don't see that as what abortion is. I see it as healthcare. And I think that healthcare is essential no matter who you are.
Now we're going to take a shift as well. Clearly, a large portion of the debate has to do when the fetus has to become something, or the cells, whatever you may call it, has to become something that we protect. Chief Justice John Roberts asked this question to Julie Rickleman on Monday.
If you think that the issue is one of choice, that women should have a choice to terminate their pregnancy, that supposes that there is a point at which they've had the fair choice. If it really is an issue about choice, why is 15 weeks not enough time?
Chief Justice Sotomayor also spoke on the fact that limits may be based in religious views. So from that standpoint, where do you feel the responsibility of the state is to come in and to take action, and what do you base that off of? We're going to start with you, Elli.
Yeah, so I think the viability factor is something it's really interesting that it's brought into the conversation because it's fairly vague, and worth noting that, going off of that standard would align the U.S. with both China and North Korea, just for some context globally. But the viability practice, 15 weeks, doesn't really have anything to do with that. A fetus is not viable to survive outside the womb until at least 22 weeks. And even then, only with significant medical intervention. A fetus does not have the physiological capacity to even feel pain until at least 24 weeks into the pregnancy. And really, it's not going to feel pain until much further into the 3rd trimester. So it's really just a question of the science of development and when that fetus that is not yet, a baby that a lot of people like to picture and say, oh, it's a baby in there. It's really not yet. And even so, just the argument of viability completely removes the woman who's carrying the baby from that conversation.
Kaylee, I'm going to turn to you for your answer as well.
So, I do want to ask a question already. Where do you think life begins then? Because, if we want to talk about science, like the baby has a heartbeat by 6 weeks, the baby has brain activity by 4 weeks. And I think that when you're pointing out the pain factor, you're just implying that, oh, it can't feel pain, so we might as well just kill it anyways, which I don't think that's a justifiable reason to end a pregnancy, is because the baby can't happen to feel pain. But I want to know where you think life begins, or what stage of the pregnancy is it suddenly a baby, and why?
Well, I will counter and say the heartbeat does not begin at 6 weeks. That is actually a flutter that will become the heart's pacemaker, and it can be picked up by ultrasound, but ultimately that's not a heartbeat. It's not a developed heart. It will develop into a heart over the next several months.
Okay, what about the brain activity?
Brain, it's not a developed brain either. These are, things that are being picked up by an ultrasound, but that is not a fully formed brain, and babies, even well after they're born, don't have self-consciousness, self-awareness. So the presence of a brain does not, equal the presence of a developed human life form. I think that you can argue when it truly becomes a life, but it still doesn't take into account the fact that there's a life carrying this fetus, this child, that is being completely pushed out of the conversation.
Well, I think it's important to bring in the mother because she is carrying the baby, but it doesn't make, just because the baby's inside the mother herself, that doesn't make them one being. That doesn't mean that the mom has 4 arms, 4 legs. They're not combined. The fetus is growing on its own, and yes, it relies on the mother for nutrients, but it's still going to form into a human. And like I said, I believe life begins at conception. And the heartbeat bill actually passed here in Texas. And based on what I've read over the bill itself, going detail by detail and reading all of the scientific evidence over when the fetus develops month by month, it is very argumentable. But
Kaylee, I want to follow up there with the same question here. If you believe, you said that life starts at conception, then where do you feel the responsibility comes in for the state to take action? And really, what do you base your beliefs off of?
Well, my beliefs are based off my morality, and morality itself, we can talk about where that comes from. Personally, mine comes from God, because that is where morality came from. And based on the state making that decision, I think that at this point, it's gotten to where women have just taken out self-responsibility as a whole. They don't hold themselves accountable when they're going out and sleeping around. And I'm going to be harsh about it, mainly because the majority of abortions are happening because women just don't want to have the baby. We can argue about rape and incest and all of that, but at the end of the day, that's less than 1% of all abortions that are performed.
We're going to shift slightly there because we're going to go back a little bit back in history here, right? Okay, I know you've just mentioned the morality aspect and where your faith comes from there. But let's take it back 50 years ago. What do you know in terms of the history in which before Roe v. Wade, the precedence was set? How do you think life was like for women back then when they were conceiving a child, when they didn't really have the option for abortion? What do you think went down back then?
Back then, we're talking about 50 years ago, right? 50 or so. Obviously, healthcare in general in the medical field is advancing significantly, every year, very fast. Back then, doctors were still doctors, and most women back in that day were not part of this whole radical feminist movement where we're embracing, not we, but where they're embracing their bodies, embracing sexuality, embracing all of this negative stuff that causes other negative things like pregnancies, where if women are just sleeping around, that stuff wasn't as casual as it is now, because I believe that a lot of that has been normalized recently, which is why teen pregnancy is very high, and why many women who maybe don't want to get pregnant are still going out of their way to do what they want in the name of feminism and embracing sexuality and finding themselves in these situations.
When we take it back to, let's say, the access to abortion, however, you would hear a lot of the stories of having back way alley abortions, doctors unable to really perform the abortions in a clinically healthy way. And do you feel, if this, let's say the Mississippi law is going to be passed, now 50 years later, we're coming at a conjunction in which, hypothetically speaking, something like back in the day from 50 years ago could happen, in which women are being forced to seek far and beyond places to be able to get that access. Is this the correct way forward? Just plain out asking you there.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think that if a woman is pregnant, finds herself pregnant, and is going out of her way to find any possible way to terminate this child, I think, like, again, the self-responsibility thing comes into aspect, because why are you so upset that you're going to go out of your way to potentially harm yourself even more? Because many women, yes, die from back alley abortions and stuff like that. You shouldn't do that to yourself. You shouldn't be looking at this child like it's such a burden. We shouldn't be teaching children that there's such burdens in life. Like, that's what we're teaching women, is that not, oh my gosh, you're pregnant, congratulations. You are literally creating a human life, which is what our bodies were made to do. You're literally telling women, oh my gosh, you're not rich enough, you're not successful enough, you're not good enough to have this baby. Here's a way out that you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about, like, you don't have to take responsibility for what you've done. It's none of that.
Elli, I'm going to
sorry, go ahead.
Please go ahead, Elli, in response to that.
I mean, if I may, it sounds like you're putting the sole responsibility of a pregnancy on a woman. And I know that our sex education is not great in the country, but I can tell you it does take two people.
It does.
And our legislation does nothing to hold a man accountable. And I'm hearing a lot of, a woman living with her choices, but it's not always her choice. And I understand that we shouldn't be making children feel as though they should have never been born or they're not wanted. But the fact of the matter is, children are born every single day into circumstances that they did not ask for, that cannot support them. So there are millions of children in this country's foster care system who are, by the way, 42% more likely to die than children who live with families in the general population. And the same people who are pushing this legislation that is essentially just pro-birth are not doing anything to support the lives of these children and these women after birth.
Well, I'm very glad you brought up the foster care system thing, because I know that that's brought into a lot of arguments. But for every one child that's in the foster care system, there are 36 families waiting to adopt. And the foster care system, I also agree that it should be fixed, and it should be way more accessible for parents to be able to adopt children because of how many parents are waiting for the kids. But I know that it takes a man and a woman to conceive a child. And we can talk about how there are many men that pay child support all the time. And then I've seen many, many videos of men who are fully capable of taking care of the children on their own, but the woman is so selfish that it's literally men standing outside of these abortion clinics begging these women to not have an abortion because they're fully capable of taking care of this child. And the woman's selfish, and she walks in, she terminates the pregnancy. And that's not fair to men at all.
So abortions are not fair to men is where we're going with it.
That's not what I said. You took it out of context. I said that
I want to bring in a point here as well. If I can
Right.
just have a second here to jump in. I know Kaylee as well and Elli, you both were talking about it being a choice. I know, Kaylee, you discussed that you're familiar with SB 8, the Texas abortion law, which does not make exceptions for the case of rape or incest. So I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, I want to add in, it does make exceptions for medical emergencies, rape and incest. When you go and you read the bill,
it doesn't. We spoke with Senator Brian Hughes. It does not make an exception for rape or incest. The only exception is if the life of the mother is in danger.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, the life in danger one, that's mainly what I wanted to point out.
But we're talking about rape here and incest when there's not a choice.
For rape and incest, no, there's not a choice. But again, you are implying that this child's life is less valuable because of the way that it was conceived.
I'm not implying anything.
No, not you. I'm just saying that anybody saying that, oh, well, you're a product of rape, you're not even worth being alive. Like, who are we to tell people that they're not worth living just because of the way that they were conceived? Because
I think you have to think about the mother, though, in this situation, right? So, yes, you're talking about a hypothetical baby who's born and then told these sorts of things, which that should be never told to anybody. But what do you say to the mother who has been raped and she has found out she's pregnant? What does she do then?
I think that because we're women, we are fully capable of carrying a baby all the way to term unless, like you said, there's a medical emergency, and our bodies were made to carry children. That is biologically what we are made to do. And she is full and well capable. There are many, many resources. I'll speak for Texas here since I live here. There's over 189 places in Texas alone that women who are victims of rape and become pregnant that can find themselves with free baby food, free ultrasounds, free healthcare in general, free housing. They're more than willing to offer help for these women.
Okay,
if the
can I
women
just
would
quickly
just
jump in here? Okay, so hypothetically speaking here, let's go, and I want to hear from both of you on this aspect. Ellie and Kaylee here. So let's say, Kaylee, who's your best friend? What's her name?
Morgan.
Ellie, your best friend?
Lindsay.
Okay, so Morgan and Lindsay come to, respectively, to both of you, and they're like, listen, I just got raped, and I know I'm carrying. I have no access to an abortion clinic within 6,000 miles of reach. Can you help me? Will you help me? What's your response to that? Let's say if you are in Texas, you got the SB 8 bill in effect, in which nobody is supposed to assist that person. What would you do?
I mean, it's no question. It's whatever her choice is, whatever she feels is best for her future is what we're going to do. If we're road tripping 1,000 miles so that she can get the health care she needs in order to keep her future on track, it's no question.
So you would risk your own position as well to assist your friend. That's as far as you would go.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, regardless of what we think is right and wrong, and whoever's morality that we are basing these decisions off of, I don't think it should be up to anybody but the person in that position.
Kaylee, how do you feel about the matter?
I would talk to Morgan at a time where she's not freaking out about the situation, and I would explain to her her different options that she has, because there are multiple options. There's many states in the country that have all of these resources, not just Texas. And we would work out a plan from there. I'd help her financially if I could. I would do as much as I could to help her keep her healthy and keep the baby healthy.
You're a good friend, which, both of you are, evidently. You would go above and beyond to be able to assist them. But there is that argument and that notion as well of the group that's going to be the most impacted would be those individuals who are poor, who do come from minorities or are young as well. And so if the Mississippi law is going to be passed in June next year, 2022, how do you imagine that they will be best supported? Do you think the resources that exist out there are enough to support these women?
I personally do not. Specifically, especially speaking on Mississippi, out of all U.S. states and territories, Mississippi ranks 52 in infant mortality. And there's nothing in this legislation that suggests that more resources will be going to take care of these children who are born into circumstances in which they may not be able to survive. We can talk about government programs and resources all we want, but the fact of the matter is, in the majority of the country, they're just not enough. They're not there for the people who need them. Mississippi governor just told the AP that this legislation is a major step toward making Mississippi the safest place in America for an unborn child. But what is lacking in all of this is, what about the child once it's born? It's always the safest place for an unborn child, but once that child is born, it seems that we have forgotten it. And the people who have all of these children that they can't support, people who are on the opposing side of this call them lazy. They're judged for being a mom with multiple children. And frankly, they just don't have the backing to properly raise a child. And I'm not seeing anything to combat that. So it really just sounds pro-birth to me.
Kaylee, what would you say against that? Seeing in Texas with the SB 8 bill, they are saying that there are going to be enough resources provided for women. Do you believe that is truly the case, that would truly be the case?
I believe so. I mean, with all of these places in Texas alone, the 189 different centers, whether they're government funded, church funded, or any other way funded, like, I believe that there are many, many, many resources that would help. And on top of that, adoption is still a very real option that people have. And like most people that adopt from foster care systems or help are pro-life, in fact, because they care about the life that's there. And it's just like, with everything going on, I think that, again, if we're allowing women to have these accessible abortions all around, not just when it's medically necessary, you're again implying, okay, well, if you sleep with this guy, then, you know, you made that mistake. Why don't you just not worry about like the responsibility that you have now and just get rid of it so you can continue to live your life? And on top of that, I just want to add real quick, you said something about poor families and minority families. That, again, it's implying that poor people aren't good enough to have kids, or the minorities aren't good enough to have kids. And on top of that as well, like, abortion itself kills more African-American babies than it does like white or any other race. And we can talk about eugenics and all of that, but.
So do you believe we should have more resources for young women of color and African-American mothers who are forced to have these children?
Absolutely. I think that there are, like, these Planned Parenthoods that are being put up are targeting specific minority areas that are almost calling these women to go ahead, get the abortion, like, we're here for you, whatever. But
well, just to be clear, Planned Parenthood, only 2% of their services go toward abortions. It's largely women's health care, birth control, breast cancer screenings. They're not synonymous with abortion, as many people would have you think. So it's,
but
it is.
Okay, wait, let's shift over to the burden of parenthood, because there's the other angle of this debate, and this is something that we're touching upon, is, forced parenting in effect, right? And so, as Kaylee, you said, it's not like minorities are not good enough to have children. It just might be a matter of fact of other circumstances that lead them to not being able to raise children. So Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she spoke on this, and here's what she had to say.
So it seems to me, seen in that light, both Roe and Casey emphasized the burdens of parenting. And insofar as you and many of your amici focus on the ways in which the forced parenting, forced motherhood would hinder women's access to the workplace and to equal opportunities, it's also focused on the consequences of parenting and the obligations of motherhood that flow from pregnancy. Why don't the safe haven laws take care of that problem?
My question to both of you is it fair for Justice Amy Coney Barrett to present another option in that sense, to present the safe haven law as an alternative to save women? Is it fair to bring that into the argument?
I personally don't think so. For anyone not familiar with the safe haven law, it pretty much says that you can drop your baby off at any designated location, like a firehouse, a hospital, and give up your rights as a parent, and you will face no backlash, which is fine. Some people are in that circumstance and they need to do that. But the bottom line is that we're arguing that the government cannot force a woman to carry a baby to term. Of course, there are always exceptions. There are always case-by-case bases that we're going to have to look at. But the bottom line is it's not about these programs that, allow you to just drop a baby off after you have it. It's still very traumatic to carry a child for 9 months that you're not prepared for, or that you didn't ask for, or that's a result of you not being educated on on how a child is conceived. It's about the fact that the government cannot take away that autonomy as a woman to tell you that you have to carry this child to term,
You keep saying
regardless of those laws.
You keep saying the word forced, and I want you to understand, like, when two people have sex, like 99% of the time, the woman chose to have sex.
I would love to see where that statistic comes from.
No forced.
From where? Like, where is that? Where is the statistic that 99% of pregnancies or sexual encounters are not forced?
You can find it anywhere, just like the 1%.
Where?
Abortions, the 1% of abortions are not, like, all of them are rape or incest. Like, you guys like to use the argument that the majority of abortions are literally because somebody got raped or because it was like incestual, but
I have never brought that argument into the conversation. I just want to know where you pulled the statistic from that says 99% of sexual encounters are consensual.
You can't ask me. You want to magically know where these statistics came from. And
I do. If you're going to bring them into the conversation, I just would ask that you cite them.
We're talking about abortion, just in general. 99% of abortions, the mother chose to have sex. So did the father. That is how the baby is created.
Let's set aside the statistics just for the time being, okay? No matter where the source comes from. Let's just set those aside. Just go back to this notion of there are other arguments being presented in which if there is that 15-week draw line or, anything below that even, that presenting the idea of being able to drop off a child thereafter, that's valid as well. Now, is there one that's worse than the other, Kaylee? I just want to know from you then in this point.
Abortion versus dropping off the child at like a firehouse or something. I think they're both equally bad. Like, if you, I don't know if any of you guys have kids. I don't have kids, so I wouldn't understand the type of love it takes to love a child. I just know that it's a lot. But if you were a mother, you were supposed to love your kid pretty much more than you love yourself. And I don't think necessarily that one is worse than the other, because I think they're both terrible. If you have the audacity to go out and drop your baby off outside, like, I don't agree with that either.
It's just in a matter of, let's say there was a case of two people not being consent to having the child. And then there was one that is having to take on the responsibility rather than the other.
Then that's where being an adult comes in. We can talk about not being financially stable, even though there are millions of jobs out there right now because of COVID. Hypothetically speaking, I don't know what time period you want to talk about, but at the end of the day, like, if you made the decision to have sex, you also consented to getting pregnant, because that is the only way you can get pregnant is by having sex.
As you guys discuss choices here in general, I want to bring up what Justice Brett Kavanaugh argued on Wednesday, that it was not possible to accommodate both the interests of the pregnant woman and the interests of the fetus, saying you have to, quote, you have to pick. That's the fundamental problem, and one interest has to prevail over the other at any other given point in time. So I'm going to start with Elli. Do you agree with Justice Kavanaugh in that way? Is this a choice and ultimately that someone has to lose here?
I don't think so. And I think that, the way that a lot of this current proposed legislation talks about abortion, talks about it as though that fetus's life, or whatever you want to call it, is being held above the woman's. This is what I was talking about earlier, where, it seems like people are saying you can only advocate for this growing fetus without advocating for the woman as well. I mean, I don't think it has to be either or, but I do think that at the end of the day, it's up to one person and one person only, and it's the person who is carrying that child. I think that that's a very black and white way of putting it. And And frankly, something I don't want to hear from a man who can't be in the situation, even if he tried.
Kaylee, turning it to you, what's your response? Do you think that there is a choice, and again, that someone's going to lose out?
I don't think we should look at a growing human life as a losing choice or a battle. I feel like there's a lot of negative connotations when it comes to pregnancy in general, around like society in general. We've made pregnancy a bad thing. We've made motherhood a bad thing. And then we're telling women, oh, hey, this is such a losing battle for you. I'm so sorry that you're pregnant, instead of I'm very happy for you. Like, so I don't think it should be considered a losing choice of whether we're choosing the mother or the baby, because it's both of them.
Do you think
Could I ask you a question pertaining to that?
Yeah.
So I have a younger sister. She can't even drive a car yet. Say she is a victim of a sexual assault, does get pregnant. What's the outcome? Like, what do you think comes from that? What are her options? If she doesn't want to carry that baby to term in high school and doesn't want to foster the child of a rapist when she made no choice to engage sexually, what does she do moving forward? What do you see as an option for her?
I'm not sure what state you live in, but you would have to look up the different resources. Like, of course, I know the ones that are in Texas because I live here, but I don't know.
But regardless of resources, if she doesn't want to have that child, do you think she should be forced to live with the consequences of her sexual assault for 9 months?
Again, you're making it a bad thing. Like,
it is a bad thing. If someone is raped, you don't think that being pregnant from rape is a bad thing?
The baby is still hers. And again, you're implying that any victim of sexual assault isn't worth being alive. And it is a child that your sister, hypothetically speaking, would still have to carry to full term, especially if it's a fully viable baby. Like, there's no
forget viability. Say it's 8 weeks in and the baby is not viable. I just want to be clear in understanding whether or not you are saying she should have to live with those consequences over the next 9 months, even though she had at no point consented.
Yes.
She didn't consent to sex, therefore, by your logic, did not consent to being pregnant. But instead, she should have to live with this fetus growing inside of her.
Yes. And I don't like that you're making it such a negative thing. Like,
a baby as a product of rape for that woman, I think it's okay for her to view it as a negative thing.
Go tell every pro-life person who chose to have the baby after being a victim of rape that their son or daughter isn't worth being alive because of the way
that's their choice. That's their choice.
It's not, because the mother is not the same as the baby.
What do you mean by that? The mother's not the same as the baby.
That the baby itself is its own person. Yes, the baby is its own human being.
I want to bring up a point here from SBA. I know, Kaylee, you're quite familiar with that as well. When we spoke with Brian Hughes and we questioned him as well about the lack of exemptions when it comes to a case of rape or incest, and he said that he didn't want it to be a worse situation for the mother, that she has to terminate a pregnancy or kill her unborn baby as a result of this rape, and he thinks it would be a better thing to bring that child to term. And he also discussed that he spoke with children that are a product of rape, and they are so thankful that they were obviously not terminated. So, Elli, I just would like you to respond to that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, frankly, speaking to children who are a product of rape and using them as a pawn in this situation is just like
pawn in this situation. You have taken rape.
Rape is in the equation, but making a child say, I'm thankful I'm still here does not.
Less than 1% of all abortions. You're acting like it's over 50%. You're using rape as a pawn.
Rape is not a pawn. It is
using products.
Let me know when you would like me to respond.
You're using it as an emotional cop out in this argument.
An emotional cop-out. Okay.
Yes.
Emotions are part of this. And I think that as someone who is anti-choice, that is something that you should fully see, because a lot of people base their anti-choice feelings, thoughts, opinions, whatever you want to call it, off of emotion, because that's a human life and people don't think you should be able to end a human life. But regardless, of course, a child is not going to say, oh no, I wish I was never born. They can't even conceptualize that.
Well, I don't know if it was necessarily still a child or
way,
not. It just could have been someone who was born out of rape. Like, do you see any valid point with that argument? I know you're talking about how it's emotional as well, but is that valid as well, where, you know, this person can go on to live a happy life and say, I'm so thankful in these situations? Do you see any validity to that point?
I mean, of course, like if that child has been born and been able to, you know, deal with that situation and has a good relationship with the mother and, you know, has gone on to become a member of society, like that is great. And that is the mother's choice. That is all I'm arguing for here, is that it is not the responsibility of the state to tell a woman you have to have that baby or you don't.
Is that at any point you're saying like it's not the responsibility of the state? Does that change with time, or do you think it's just open till the end of the pregnancy?
I don't think it's open till the end of the pregnancy. You know, I don't think you should be at like 38 weeks and just decide. And Roe v. Wade doesn't make it so either.
Right.
You know, in the first trimester, that is when Roe v. Wade says the state may not regulate the abortion decision. In the second trimester, a state can impose regulations that are reasonable related to the mom's health. And I think that, you know, as much as it will take a lot of time and resources, it does become a case-by-case basis at a certain point. And, you know, it's not like these women are getting pregnant, getting halfway through their term and being like, I just am not feeling it anymore. You know, it's an incredibly traumatic experience for a woman to go through abortion, especially late term. And a lot of times it's not something they want to do, but rather something that they have to do because of their circumstance, whether it's financial, whether it's medical. I think we could all agree, yes, they would have to if that meant the mother was going to die.
We're going to jump topics here as well.
Sorry.
And
Great. Kaylee was just saying something. I also saw you nodding your head, so I just wanted to see what you had to say to that.
Yeah, I was agreeing with the fact that that abortions are very traumatic towards women. There's, I don't have this percentages off the top of my head, but it increases in mental health. Women who have abortions are more likely to rely on drugs and alcohol after their mental health severely declines, and it's very, very dangerous for the women. Most people would argue that the side effects of an abortion are more damaging than going ahead and carrying a baby to full term.
And kind of continuing on a different point here, do you think there's any double standard when it comes to how conservatives or liberals view these issues? Right now, we have almost a weird parallel, right, with the vaccine, where liberals feel strongly about government-mandated health measures in instances of vaccines, but not for abortions. And conversely, conservatives feel strongly about the limited role of government in personal lives, except when it comes to reproductive rights. So I'm going to start with you, Kaylee. Do you see sort of that double standard?
That's a great point. I do see the whole mask mandate thing going on and them wanting to, you know, the vaccine isn't your choice, you have to do it. And then being very lenient on abortions, and then vice versa, the conservatives. That's more of a limit, like a libertarian ideology, with being so forceful on one and then not that much on the other. But there are double standards a lot of the time. True conservatives, though, are completely right wing, and with conservatives and the government, like I know many conservatives who don't necessarily want less government. The libertarian view is the one that wants no government, wants no control over anything or anybody. Conservatives still want government control, just from a right-wing perspective based on morality.
I'm going to
and
turn
what's
it
right.
to Elli as well for Elli to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is a lot of conservatives who tend to say the vaccine is my body, my choice. Sorry?
Because we've taken y'all's term and used it against you because it's dumb.
Okay. Anyway, so people have, you know, as she said, co-opted that term, and it seems to apply only when you want it to apply. You know, you don't have to get the vaccine, but then you can't go in certain public places, or if you do, you need to wear a mask. So if that is your choice, yes, that's a double standard. I don't understand how that can be a choice, but we can't make a choice as women to carry a baby to term for whatever reason. I do think that's completely a double standard. I know everyone thinks it's very like clever to have co-opted the term, but it's really a shot in the foot. Because like I said, it is a complete double standard in the fact that it's saying my body, my choice, only when the choice is the choice I agree with. And I would take it one step further and just say, you know, controlling women is something that a lot of people in this country use as an excuse for, you know, xenophobia when it comes to looking at other countries and cultures that, you know, some people here may not agree with. You know, a lot of people will look at countries in the Middle East and say, oh, they make a woman wear this. A woman's not allowed to do this. She has to marry this man. They're terrible people because of that. But then when it comes to our own country and we want to strip women of their rights, you know, that seems to just go out the window. So I think there's a lot of double standards in this situation. I don't think that we will necessarily reconcile or come to an agreement over it, but
I mean, if you want to talk about women in other countries, like who are actually more oppressed than women are here, many women in America complain that they're getting their rights taken away and all of that. We can talk about women who actually don't have rights in the other countries, because that's something that I also stand behind. And I don't think, like the women in Iraq and Afghanistan, all of that, when we were worried about the Taliban coming and taking over, like there are women in other countries who are 10 times more oppressed than the women here. And I feel like it's not their rights.
So should we in turn just say, okay, we're all right with some oppression because other people have it worse?
No, that's not what I'm implying at all.
Okay, we're just going to hop in here just for the final question. You're kind of touching upon this as well. Internationally speaking, there are some, you know, international human rights that will deem what is going on in America is against human rights. Kaylee, you may stand against that. Elli, you are for that. To wrap it up, because we're talking about the Mississippi law that could potentially really just flip the narrative of 50 years ago, and what women will have in these 50 years have experienced that will sort of come back if the Mississippi law comes into effect in June 2022. To what extent do you think this law of abortion rights can have an impact on other legislations across the states here in America?
Elli, we can start with you.
Okay. I mean, I think it would have a huge impact. There's, I believe it's 21 states poised and ready to go to, you know, release or propose legislation that is greatly restrictive on abortions. And in certain states, you know, it will retroactively impose laws from before Roe v. Wade. So laws that are 30, 40 years old. And, you know, it's with no mention of updating those laws to apply to current day. So I think overturning Roe v. Wade as just a blanket precedent will have effect on, I mean, legislation in almost every single state, if that answers your question. But I mean, going off that to overturn precedent in the Supreme Court, normally there needs to be a very concrete reason to overturn something that has stood for almost 50 years and has had the support of justices on the Supreme Court for almost 50 years now. And our Constitution itself, people have looked to the 14th Amendment to, say that a state is prohibited from outlawing abortion with respect to the pregnancy of a woman because it violates that woman's right to privacy. So this law, should it be overturned, is essentially just knocking part of our Constitution. I mean, it is in our Constitution that we have a right to privacy. Roe v. Wade deemed abortion as a part of your right to privacy. And so I can only imagine that overturning it would have a wide ripple effect.
Kaylee, what's your response to Elli as a final remark? Where do you see this going in the future, and what are your hopes as well?
So she's right. There's like about 21 states that are ready to do their own abortion laws, and I completely agree with it. I think the country may or may not be going in the right direction somewhat, no matter who the administration is. And overall, I think that because for the past 2 years, we've been so pushed around by the Democratic agenda that now the right is starting to fight back and actually implement things into society that will positively affect them and start teaching people self-responsibility, taking responsibility for a situation that you 100% caused. And I just want to say that it's not a human right. Like, abortion is not human right. Killing a baby is not a human right.
If I may just add one last point, regardless of us bringing our morals into this, the Mississippi Solicitor General, Scott Stewart himself, said during oral arguments on Wednesday in the case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, when an issue affects everyone and when the Constitution doesn't take sides on it, it belongs to the people. And I don't see how that does not indicate that is the choice of the person that this is affecting as to whether or not they want to carry that baby. If the argument has been made in this case that the choice belongs to the people, I mean, it just sounds pretty pro-choice to me.
You're just forgetting the whole part of the fact that we're arguing about the fact that there's a baby, a living human being inside this woman. And that
it wouldn't be living without the woman up to a certain point, though.
I want to talk about viability again, because with that logic speaking, somebody laying dead or dying in a hospital on life support also doesn't deserve to be living, because they rely on that life support machine. So would you just off them too? Because viability.
If we want to get into that person actually should have that choice.
Well, they're
if they should yeah. There's legal paperwork that you have in place beforehand. That's completely separate.
Somebody on life support before, because they can't make that choice. They're laying there.
You have that set out beforehand. Someone makes that choice for you. You legally have somebody appointed to do that.
Not true.
Yes, it is.
Okay, just before we head on out, because Elli, you had mentioned Roe v. Wade, 22, 24-week marker. Kaylee, evidently you're in Texas. They are pushing for the 6-week marker. Is there a middle ground? Do you believe 15 weeks is enough, or should it be 20, or should it be 6?
I believe it should. I'm okay with the 6. Granted, with right now what Texas has done, they were very, very forward with making it 6 months in Texas.
6 months.
When I was reading about Mississippi earlier.
6 weeks.
6 weeks, yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to say 6 months. With 6 weeks, again, that's when the heartbeat develops, according to science, which is what we're basing this argument off of. Yes, it is. Show me where it doesn't. The brain activity starts at 4 weeks, and I think that Texas stood out, and the whole Mississippi thing is 15 weeks, I believe, and I think it should be earlier than that because the baby develops very quickly. You can look at the month-by-month development of a fetus.
And Ellie, you still hold to 22 to 24 weeks or any
I mean,
less?
I think that it's a decision that a woman should make with a medical professional and under the advice of a medical professional. I don't think that there's a correct blanket answer. But I just don't think it's a decision that the state should be making. I think that a woman needs to sit down with her doctor, with her gynecologist and obstetrician, and make this decision themselves, regardless of where it is in the pregnancy. Obviously, after a certain point, when that baby can survive outside of the womb, there's circumstances that need to be taken into account, whether, it's the woman could pass away from birth, or there's, obviously just something going on as to where the fetus and the woman cannot both survive, or it would be greatly dangerous. I don't think that there's necessarily a cutoff that it's just like a one size fits all fixer for everything. Like I said, I think the people that should be involved in this decision making are the women and the medical professionals, not the men who are proposing legislation.
And with that, we want to say thank you both for this exciting debate here on Erupt. We both appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
We hope
Thanks
to have
for
you
having
back
me,
again
guys.
soon.
Thank you.